Hello, I'm Bob O'Neill, Executive Director of the International City-County Management Association, and welcome to the Leading Edge series. I'm joined by Dr. Paul McDonald, an expert in neuroscience and the connection to leadership, so welcome.
Thanks, Bob. Glad to be here.
Well, it's good for me to be here because this is a topic that is of significant interest to me. So first, let's do a little bit of definition work here. Tell us a little bit about neuroscience.
Okay, well, just to contextualize, I've been in the leadership space for nearly 3 decades now. And it was out of a sense of frustration of trying to understand leadership, largely based on paper pencil tests and self-report, that I started to get into biography, and then that led me into, about 2008, into neuroscience. And neuroscience is in my mind, a new frontier. It is, we globally have spent billions of dollars exploring outer space, and will continue to do so, which I'm in favor of. But we are now just starting to spend billions of dollars looking at the inner universe. And one of the things that fascinates me about neuroscience is in each of our heads, about 100 billion neurons, with 7,000 on average synaptic connections. The intricacy of that is at the same level of order of magnitude as the Milky Way. Right. To me, it's a new frontier, and it's going to radically change the leadership landscape as we understand it.
So there's a number of connections here that I want to try to explore. One is that I think there's some interesting connections that I know you've tried to explore a little bit between neuroscience, behavioral economics, and leadership. And could you explore a little bit more about some of those kind of connections that connect human behavior to the leadership components?
Sure. I mean, first of all, leadership's a very difficult job in the current context because we're getting into exponentiality and almost continuous upward change, whether it's in roading, electric cars, energy sources, biotech, wide AI, wide artificial intelligence. So as much as we need good managers, above them and around them and beside them, we need good leaders. And these are people who are thinking long-term and not thinking about just improvements, but thinking about change at a fundamental level. Cities are going to change dramatically in the next 20 years, and we need people who basically trust their brains. Mm-hmm. They trust the magnificent knowledge, and a lot of times, from my perception, what we do is we mistrust what our brain is telling us, and we trust greater what some sort of spreadsheet, right, cost-benefit analysis telling us. So there are a series of lessons I think leaders can learn from insights from neuroscience. And the biggest one sounds almost simplistic, but it is very powerful. The brain doesn't work very well under stress. It needs water. It's highly liquid organ, and it doesn't need the amygdala, which is the fight-flight response, firing all the time. And if I could only perhaps teach executives one thing, it would be to find, and I'm not talking about to find their quiet spot. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about them becoming a Zen Buddhist, okay? That's the common sort of view of that. I'm talking about find somewhere, some point once a day in the 24/7 sort of area where we live now, and get in touch with your breathing, get in touch with your real thoughts. And if I could add to this, another technique that goes hand in hand with this finding your present, be in the present, is this, and I'm surprised this is not a widespread word, metacognition. Mm-hmm. We teach in the courses I'm involved in people to metacognate, which is simply to think about thinking. It's not a hard concept. Surprisingly, most people have never heard of it.
It's hard to do, though.
Well, first step is knowing that it's out there. Second step is give yourself permission to metacognate. Those who paused and said, can we think about what we're thinking about for 5 minutes? What assumptions are we making? Are we pushing this meeting too long? The other aspect of the brain I think is misunderstood in organizations is Miller's famous article, I think 1958, 7
early.
plus or minus 2.
Right.
While we worship logic and facts and figures in local government and in business and in national government, the brain, the prefrontal cortex, only can deal with 7 plus or minus major chunks of information.
Right. So I want to push you a little bit on the stress question, because obviously a chief executive's role in local government has some stress inherent in the position itself. And what we do know a little bit about from brain science is a little bit of stress fires some good things, but it's when you go beyond that sort of what I call healthy stress to the non-healthy. Can you, is that something you find?
Well, like sort of environment, sensory overload, almost Las Vegas type conditions, fueled by caffeine, fueled by fear and greed, and then all of a sudden no one metacognated there and said, wait a minute, does it make sense? So you do need some stress, but I'd say if you look at the use of antidepressants around the world, we're probably on the wrong side of the curve right now.
So you have some description of sort of 5 lessons or 5 advice for leaders. You want to give us those?
Number one we've touched on briefly is leaders need to be self-aware and in the present.
Right.
And that includes self-acceptance. People say, well, what is leadership? Is it this, is it that? To me, having been a long time in the business, it's simply finding who you are, finding your passion, aligning those two things and accepting who you are, warts and all. I've interviewed a lot of leaders, and there isn't one of them with some warts as well as amazing charisma. Right. And accept that and get on with what you're there to do, which leads to that new concept of authenticity. You become authentic, people trust you. So the first thing is learn a mechanism where you are not looking at the outer universe 24/7, which includes iPhone, TV feed into your office, and learn that a small portion of your day or week, and you have to start small and build up, it's like exercise. Learn that you can go inside of your head into that quiet, and your brain will respond to that. It will relax, it will float things past you. So the first point is we need senior government managers who are reflective and have self-awareness. The second point is we need senior government managers who can do what I call balanced decision making. If someone's been in local government for 25 years, they have developed patterns. And they may not be able to articulate those patterns, but they have patterns of intuition. And they also, because they have a prefrontal cortex, have a battery of facts and figures and what we'd call abstract cause and effect relationships. When they go to a meeting, it seems to me that they can only use their prefrontal cortex, because unless you're Stephen Jobs or Walt Disney, if you go to a meeting, and I always say this in seminars and everyone laughs, I say, go on Monday back to your board or to your council and say, we've got to do this. And they say, why? And you say, I just feel it. I feel it in my bones. They will laugh, and they will laugh you out. And what we tend to do is we dress up those intuitions with facts and figures. But we've got to legitimate this sort of pattern system that works for everything from me reaching to this glass, which is I don't have to think about it, to how I might view the city, and these patterns are intuition. The third point is that leaders need to be more worldly or what we call pluralistic.
Right.
here in New Zealand not seeing maybe one view of the city, but seeing several views. And the brain, unfortunately, doesn't like to be pluralistic. There's the concept of cognitive dissonance. It likes things to fit, and it will make, I can show people experiments where it will cheat to make things fit.
Right.
It will bend reality. And what we have to do as executives is, it's a bit like exercise. We have to force plurality on us. And there are exercises like the Stroop test, etc., where over time the brain becomes more comfortable
right.
with outconvergence. And that's what we need in a complex world, is
right.
we need divergence. So that's the third point. The fourth one, and probably one of the saddest, well, that's an overstatement, out-of-date, obsolete aspects of neurological physiology is the brain is very quick to differentiate between in-group, out-group membership. Like almost instantaneous. Even though at a conscious level you may say, well, I'm fine with everyone in this room,
Right.
it will have differentiated at an unconscious level. We make assumptions about people who are not in our in-group. There's neuroscience has shown, for example, that feedback from an out-group member is discounted versus feedback from an in-group member.
Right.
So it almost puts 360-degree feedback into question. So there's no easy solution to this propensity, but the more you're aware of it, the more likely
mm-hmm.
you are to combat it. So that if the first is reflective and the second is balanced thinking, and the third is plurality or worldly thinking, the fourth is collaborative. Leaders can no longer operate without being collaborative. The era of autocratic leaders is over. They're dealing in networked situations where there's power relations are unclear, and they need to collaborate. And the other thing that we learned from neuroscience on the collaborative front is theory of mind, which is we all deals with social status, is extremely busy when you're not solving problems and thinking. So the human brain is extremely worried about social connection, social standing, probably for genetic reasons, and now somewhat out of date. So theory of mind, we can test for this. Some executives have very high theory of mind, so they can empathize,
right.
and they can, to use a New Zealand term, suss people out very easily. And others don't. And we need to teach people that. So that's the fourth dimension, is this ability to understand how your brain works in social situations. And the final aspect is, despite all the complexity, turbulence, is managers and leaders, particularly senior leaders, need to act. Because the rest doesn't matter if you don't act. And people say, well, I'm not sure well, get used to it, because it's going to get worse. The brain is wired to avoid loss more than to gain reward at a ratio of 2 to 1. Right. So if you're a senior manager going to constituents or to your staff in a local government context, and you say to them, we can have this, but we need to give up that. And they often think it's a 1-to-1, it's right. a balance. It's not, it's right. a 2-to-1. And because we are very reluctant to give up things. This is why sustainability is so hard.
It is.
What we're gaining is sort of abstract, but what we're giving up
right.
is very tangible. And we're saying, no,
right.
I'm not going to do it. So those are the five.
Right.
Yeah, the five. Yeah.
So let's try to translate that for leadership developments. How could we change that experience and curricula to be more supportive of better leadership?
Well, excellent question. And in fact, most leadership development is still highly theoretical,
Right.
highly model driven. And you get students going out of there with an A+. They can totally regurgitate the theory on a test or in a case study, and their behavior doesn't change.
So is authenticity?
Let's say there's some pillars here. One would be self-awareness, which leads to authenticity,
Okay.
and self-acceptance. You simply become like some of these people, and not all of them. The other thing about leadership, it's not a personality contest. Some of these people, Stephen Jobs, Disney, etc., were very, very difficult people to deal with, but they were authentic to who they were.
Right.
So let's say one pillar is self-awareness. For example, my MBA students have to write their own personal obituary as part of the course.
Right.
And that floors them a bit. But I said, well, why are you here? You know,
Right.
The other thing is, if you think, and we were discussing this earlier before we filmed, is if you think about how the brain works, it only really remembers things for the most part, because there's semantic things we do remember, but long-term memory, the hippocampus has to emotionally tag the event. So if the student isn't emotionally engaged in the leadership development, and by that I mean almost experientially, the chances of them achieving long-term behavioral change are very, very slim.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing your thoughts with us today. I'm sure it's an exciting emerging field. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you very much.